I helped her achieve her dream, only for her to leave me for a rich man, but the twist will shock you. I still remember the first time I met her. It was at a community event, one of those small gatherings where people try to make a difference, but you never expect anything life-changing to happen. I was 24, just getting by, working as a warehouse manager, living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping together enough for rent, let alone anything else. And then there was Emma. She stood across the room, effortlessly drawing everyone's attention without even trying. Intelligent, confident, and incredibly beautiful, she had a presence that felt almost unreal. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, and by the end, I felt like I had known her forever. It was one of those moments that felt like fate, as if the universe had aligned just for the two of us to meet. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just ambitious, she had dreams that were bigger than anything I could imagine. Emma wasn't like the girls I'd known before. She didn't have the luxury of an easy life. Her family struggled. Her dad wasn't around, and her mom worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Emma, the girl who seemed to have it all together, confessed to me that she wasn't sure she'd even be able to finish college, let alone go to law school. The cost of tuition was an insurmountable wall, and she didn't know how she could ever make it happen. I remember looking at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't ask for help, but I couldn't ignore the pull in my chest. I couldn't just walk away and leave her to figure it out on her own. So, without really thinking, I made her a promise. I told her that I'd help her get to where she wanted to go. That's how deep my feelings for her were, even back then. I didn't have much, but if it meant she could chase her dreams, I would give whatever I could. I didn't hesitate. I believed in her. I believed in us. At first, it was small things. I helped her pay for groceries and textbooks when she couldn't afford them. I could see how guilty it made her feel, like she didn't want to be a burden, but I reassured her. I wanted to do this. For her. For us. It wasn't just about money, it was about giving her the chance to focus on her future without worrying about the weight of bills. And I kept telling myself this was the beginning of something amazing. When she made it big, we'd both benefit. When she finished school, we'd start building our life together. I didn't think about how much I was sacrificing, how much I was putting on the line. All I cared about was her and the life we were going to have. I truly believed that helping her achieve her dreams would be the best investment I could ever make. The day Emma received her acceptance letter to the prestigious university was the day everything changed. Her dream was within reach, but with it came an even bigger challenge. The tuition fees were astronomical, and as much as she tried to stay hopeful, I could see the worry in her eyes. "Chris, I don't know if I can do this," she said one night, her voice shaky. "It's just so much money. What if I can't keep up?" "Don't worry, Em," I reassured her, even though I was starting to feel the weight of the situation myself. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But the truth was, I wasn't sure how. I had never imagined things would get this hard. I had already given so much, and yet every day the pile of bills and expenses seemed to grow higher. But I couldn't turn back now. I had made my promise. I had to follow through. So I started working more. Extra shifts at the warehouse, freelancing on weekends, even taking up odd jobs just to make sure I could cover her tuition, her rent, her books, and everything in between. I sold things, anything I could live without. My old gaming consoles, rare collectibles, even my car. I didn't care about any of that, all that mattered was Emma's future. But it wasn't enough. I had to max out my credit cards, take out a small loan. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, another expense would come up, and it felt like I was sinking deeper and deeper into a hole I could never climb out of. "I'll make it up to you, I swear," Emma would say, her eyes filled with gratitude when I handed her the money, when I paid for her books or made sure she had a place to live without any distractions. But there was a tension I couldn't ignore. She wasn't the same person anymore. The long hours she spent studying, her new friends, her constant talks about how amazing law school was, it started to push us apart. She didn't even notice it at first, but I felt it. There were times when she'd come home after a long day, and instead of sitting down to talk, she'd be glued to her phone, chatting with her classmates or scrolling through her social media. "Hey, we haven't had dinner together in a while," I said one evening, trying to keep things normal. "How about we just take a break and catch up?" "I'm really tired, Chris," she replied, barely looking up. "Can we do it later? I've got to finish this assignment." The words stung more than I let on. I just nodded, pretending I understood. But deep down, the exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was emotional. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase. That once she graduated, once everything settled, we'd be okay. That once she had everything she wanted, we'd finally have the life we dreamed of. But the sacrifices, they were beginning to show. My savings were gone, my credit was shot, and the strain was starting to take its toll on me. But I couldn't stop. Not when I was so close to seeing her live her dream. I wanted to believe that one day all of this would be worth it. Every time I looked at her, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I loved her. This was for her future, for our future. I convinced myself that the late nights, the drained bank accounts, the emotional toll, it would all make sense in the end. After all, love was supposed to be about sacrifice, right? But somewhere deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were growing apart. I brushed it off every time. She was just stressed, right? Once the pressure of school was over, everything would go back to normal. I had to believe that. Because if I didn't, everything I'd given up would have been for nothing. And that thought terrified me. Emma's graduation was supposed to be the beginning of everything. We had made it through the hardest part, the late nights, the endless sacrifices. Now, she had her degree, and I thought that meant we could finally start planning our future. But the reality was far different from what I had imagined. It started subtly, little things at first. The long hours she spent studying turned into late-night networking events, client meetings, and law firm social hours. I knew she was getting her foot in the door at the firm of her dreams, but I didn't realize how far she was stepping away from me in the process. "Chris, I'm really sorry. I've got this big event tonight," she'd say, her voice distracted as she grabbed her things and rushed out the door. "Can we talk tomorrow?" Tomorrow never came. She'd come back late, sometimes too tired to even say more than a few words, her mind already elsewhere. There was a distance I couldn't bridge, no matter how hard I tried. "I know you're busy, but we haven't had a proper dinner in a week," I said one evening, hoping to spark something familiar. "Just one night, Em? Can we have one night together?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Chris, I really have to finish this. My boss needs those papers by morning. I'll make it up to you, I promise." The words had started to lose their meaning. She always promised, but nothing ever came of it. I tried to hide it, told myself it was just a phase, that she was simply getting settled into her career. But as the days went by, it became harder and harder to ignore the truth. She had changed. It wasn't just her schedule that had grown busier, it was the way she looked at me. There was less warmth in her eyes, less of that spark I used to see. She had become more consumed with her new world, her law school friends, her high-profile job, the career that was shaping her into someone I didn't recognize. It felt like the more successful she became, the further she drifted away from the person who had been there for her through every step. "I'm so tired, Chris," she said one night after I tried to talk to her about how distant she'd become. "I just need some space. You wouldn't understand how intense things are right now." That was the moment it hit me. The woman I had worked so hard for, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, no longer needed me in the way she used to. The worst part was, I couldn't even bring myself to be angry at her. I had watched her rise, and in the process, I had been left behind. I had given so much of myself, my time, my money, my dreams, and now all I had was an empty apartment and a broken heart. Every time I walked in the door, I hoped for a change, for her to finally come back to me, to the us that we once were. But that us was slipping away, and I felt like I was losing her piece by piece. And still, I kept pushing forward. I kept telling myself that once she was settled, once she had the life she dreamed of, we'd finally be happy. But with every hour she spent away, every night she came home exhausted and distant, my hope began to fade. I tried to make it work, to keep her in my world. But her world was changing so fast, and I couldn't keep up. The more she grew, the more I realized I was just a memory she was slowly outgrowing. "Can we just talk?" I asked her one evening, my voice laced with frustration, something I'd never felt before. She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with the same exhaustion that had started to define her. "Chris, I don't have time for this right now. I really need to focus." That was the last time I truly tried. And that was when I knew things were never going to go back to how they were. It was a Tuesday night when everything came crashing down. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, as I sat at the kitchen table, my thoughts swirling with the usual worries, money, work, and the growing distance between Emma and me. I had hoped tonight would be different. I had finally convinced her to come home early, to take a break from work and everything else. Maybe we could finally reconnect, talk like we used to. But when the door opened, I knew something was off. She stepped inside, her face pale, her expression distant, like she had already made up her mind about something. My heart skipped a beat. "Chris, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. There was a coldness in her tone that I hadn't heard before. I stood up, confusion creeping into my chest. "What's going on? What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." She closed the door behind her but didn't move toward me. Instead, she just stood there, looking at me like she was seeing me for the last time. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. "I'm leaving," she said, her words coming out in a rush, as though they had been waiting to escape for a long time. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "What do you mean? Where are you going?" Emma, what are you talking about? Her eyes met mine, but they didn't hold the warmth they once did. They were cold, distant, calculating even. I'm leaving you for someone else. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My knees went weak and I had to grab onto the counter to steady myself. Someone else. I echoed, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Who? She didn't hesitate. A senior partner at the firm. His name's William. He's everything I've ever wanted. He comes from money, he's successful, and he can offer me the life I've always dreamed of. The lifestyle you could never give me. My heart felt like it was being torn in half. I had given everything for her. I had sacrificed my savings, my time, my energy, everything. I had believed in us, in our future together. And now she was standing here, telling me she was leaving me for someone who could give her more than I ever could. How could you do this? I whispered, the hurt too raw to hide. After everything I've done for you, all the years I've spent working, supporting you, believing in us. Emma took a step closer, but it didn't feel like she was coming toward me. It felt like she was moving further away. I never asked you to do any of that, Chris, she said, her voice almost indifferent. You chose to help me, remember? It wasn't my choice. You just kept giving and I kept taking. I never asked for all of this. I felt like I had been slapped across the face. You never asked? You never asked for any of it. I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. I gave everything for you, Emma. I worked myself to the bone to help you make your dreams come true. And this is how it ends. She looked down, avoiding my eyes. I never wanted you to sacrifice everything for me. But you did it, and now I'm doing what's best for me. I'm choosing my future. I have to, Chris. Her words hit harder than anything else. She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't regretful. She was cold, detached, like I was just a chapter in her life she was ready to close. Do you even love me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to hear her say it, needed some sign that all the years we had shared meant something to her. Anything. Emma paused for a moment, her eyes flickering with something. Guilt? Regret? Or maybe it was just uncertainty. But when she spoke, her voice was firm. I think I could love him, she said, almost apologetically, as if she were trying to make it sound like less of a betrayal. I know what I want now, and it's not you, Chris. And in that moment, I felt like my whole world had shattered. All the sacrifices, all the nights I'd stayed up, all the things I'd given up for her, none of it mattered. She was walking away without a second glance, like it had all been meaningless. Like I had been nothing more than a stepping stone for her to climb to a better life. I was left standing there, empty, my mind racing, my heart broken. She didn't even offer to make things right. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't apologize for everything she had put me through. Instead, she just walked out the door, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life that felt like it had been built on lies. As I stood there, staring at the door she had just walked through, it hit me all at once. Everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was a lie. All the love, all the support, all the promises we had made, it meant nothing in the end. I had been played. I had been a fool. And now I was left with nothing but the emptiness she had left behind. The days after Emma left felt like they were stretching on forever. I couldn't escape the feeling of loss, the gaping hole in my chest where she used to be. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the constant nagging thoughts, but no matter how hard I tried, the truth lingered. She had walked away. And now I was left to deal with the wreckage. The debt, the unpaid bills, the credit card statements, everything came crashing down on me all at once. I couldn't escape it. No matter how many late-night shifts I took, no matter how hard I worked, the weight of what had happened was crushing. I felt like I was suffocating under the pressure, but there was no way out. And then came the social media posts. At first, I tried to ignore them. I told myself it wasn't worth it. But one night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through Instagram, and there she was. Emma. Smiling, looking as perfect as ever, but this time there was something different. She wasn't alone. She was with him. William. The man she had left me for. They were in Paris, sipping wine at a fancy cafe, the Eiffel Tower lit up behind them. Another post, another lavish dinner in some five-star restaurant. I couldn't help but feel the bitterness rise in my chest as I watched her flaunt her new life, her new partner, like I had never existed. I had been there for her through everything, sacrificing my own happiness so she could succeed. And now she was living the dream I had helped build for her with someone else. Someone richer. Someone who could offer her the life she wanted. It was like a slap in the face every time I saw a new picture, a new status update. But then something unexpected happened. Mike, one of our mutual friends, reached out to me. He had been trying to stay out of the mess, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice when he called. Chris, you need to know something about William, he said, his tone serious. I don't know if Emma knows this, but I've heard some things, bad things. Mike went on to explain that William's wealth wasn't exactly what it seemed. There were rumors swirling around about his past, about the way he'd scammed women, pretending to be someone he wasn't. A man of wealth, a man of power, but it all appeared to be smoke and mirrors. I didn't want to believe it at first. I didn't want to think that Emma, my Emma, could fall for someone like that. But as Mike told me more, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. This man, the one Emma had chosen over me, wasn't who he appeared to be. He had a history of fraud, embezzlement charges, and even a string of failed marriages. All of it painted a picture of a man who was nothing more than a con artist hiding behind a facade. I couldn't stop myself. I started digging, searching through old news articles, court documents, anything I could find that might shed light on the truth. The more I uncovered, the darker the picture became. William had been sued multiple times for fraud. He had used his wealth to manipulate and deceive people, and it looked like he was already deep in debt, with creditors closing in. Part of me felt vindicated. Here was the man she had chosen, the one who seemed to have it all: wealth, status, everything Emma had ever wanted. And yet, the more I learned, the more I realized he was just another liar, a fraud hiding behind expensive suits and fancy dinners. But another part of me, the part that still cared for her, felt pity. She didn't deserve this. She had fallen for a man who would use her, just like he had used the others before her. The realization hit me hard. Emma had walked away from a man who loved her, who had given everything for her, only to fall into the arms of someone who would break her just as easily. I hated her for what she had done, but I also couldn't ignore the part of me that wanted to protect her. I wanted to reach out to her, to warn her. But I knew I couldn't. She had made her choice. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of wanting justice. I had given everything for her, and now she was living in the shadow of a man who didn't deserve her. But what could I do? I wasn't sure anymore. Part of me wanted to confront her, to expose William for who he really was, but another part of me knew it wasn't my fight anymore. She had walked away, and there was no going back. I thought about the day she left me, her cold words, her indifference to everything I had done. And yet, in the silence of the night, I found myself asking the same question over and over: how could she do this to me? But as the days passed, that question started to fade. The anger slowly turned into something else. Something stronger. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. Done with her. Done with the lies. Done with the pain. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that it was time for me to move on. It had been months since Emma had walked out of my life, months since I'd convinced myself that I was finally free from the suffocating grip of the past. I had worked hard to rebuild myself, my finances, my mental state, my sense of self-worth. Slowly but surely, I was clawing my way back, piece by piece. I had landed a new job at a marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it was mine. It felt like a fresh start, a break from everything that had held me down for so long. I found myself waking up every day with a renewed sense of purpose. I was living for myself now, no one else. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Then, one day, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something told me I should answer. When I did, I almost couldn't believe my ears. "Chris," Emma's voice cracked on the other end. "I need your help." My heart stopped for a second, the weight of her voice pulling me back to a place I thought I had long left behind. She sounded desperate, broken in a way I hadn't heard before. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I never should have left you. I never should have done this to you. But I need you now. I'm in trouble. I'm stuck with him. William, he's not who I thought he was. I don't know who else to turn to." I felt the anger and hurt rise up inside me, but it wasn't like before. It was different this time. Instead of rage, I felt something else, something unexpected. Compassion. Maybe even pity. She was scared. She was trapped. I took a deep breath. "Emma," I said, my voice calm but firm, "what are you asking me to do?" "I don't know what to do anymore, Chris," she replied, her voice shaking. "He's been controlling me, lying to me, and now I'm stuck in this marriage. I need help. I don't know where else to go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who had walked out on me, who had left me in the dust with nothing but a broken heart and a pile of debt. Yet here she was, coming to me asking for help. My first instinct was to hang up, to tell her that I owed her nothing, that she had made her choice, and now it was time for her to deal with the consequences. But something stopped me. I realized that, despite everything, I couldn't just leave her in this situation. It wasn't about forgiveness, it wasn't about rekindling anything we had, it was about doing what was right. I agreed to help, but only because I knew I couldn't turn my back on someone who was genuinely in trouble. I reached out to a lawyer I knew through my new job, gave her the resources she needed, and helped her understand her options. I offered practical advice, steps she could take to get out of the situation safely. I didn't offer her any false promises, no hope of reconciliation, no second chances. When it was all over, she called to thank me. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "I've messed up so much, you were right about him. I never should have left you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She didn't need to apologize for me to know that she had learned something important. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I had learned something, too. I had learned that I didn't need to keep reliving the past. I didn't need to carry the weight of what she had done to me anymore. And when she called again a few weeks later, asking if we could start over, I knew what I had to do. I met her once at a coffee shop just to hear her out. She looked different. Worn down, fragile in a way that I hadn't expected. It was like the spark in her had dimmed, replaced by the cold reality of her choices. "Chris," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to start over. I miss you. I know I hurt you, but I've changed. I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, my heart a little heavier than before, but I also knew something that I hadn't known back then. I had already moved on. "Emma," I said, my voice steady but kind, "I've done a lot of thinking, and I've come to realize that I'm not the same person I was when we were together. I've worked too hard to rebuild my life to go back to what we had. I deserve better than that. And so do you." Her face fell, the realization hitting her harder than any of the words I could have said. But I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I owed her anything anymore. I had given her everything I had, and now it was time to give that same energy to myself. I stood up to leave, my heart lighter than I had expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. And that was enough. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had finally let go. Not for her, but for me. I had moved on. And for the first time, I was truly living for myself. That was the twist I didn't see coming. The one where I realized that my happiness, my future, didn't depend on anyone else but me. And with that understanding, I found a peace I never thought I'd have again.